Hello Data Geeks, welcome to Data Platform Virtual Summit 2022. My name is Mikey Bronowski and I will be presenting a session about Azure Elastic Jobs, the PowerShell edition. Few words about me. I'm Microsoft Data Platform MVP and Microsoft Certified Trainer, currently working for datamasterminds.io in England, but originally I'm from Poland. I have a wonderful wife Magda and 3-year-old son Artur. That's all you really want to know about me. If you want to get in touch or ask me a question after the session or about something different, just use Mikey Bronowski, no space, at Twitter, LinkedIn, Gmail, Instagram. So get in touch and let's jump into the topic. Okay, what are the Elastic Jobs and Elastic Job Agents, like in details? This is a basically SQL Server agent for Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Server. And whatever you can do in our agent, SQL-wise, T-SQL-wise, in a SQL Server agent on premises, you can also do in Azure Elastic agent. It only triggers the T-SQL tasks, so you cannot run like PowerShell code or command line and like DTS packages. It will execute the T-SQL code. But it also expands the functionality, the basic functionality of SQL Server agent. If you are familiar with master and target servers concept in SQL Server, you will find it useful in Azure Elastic Jobs as well. So what are the master and target servers? You can create that or basically define on one server on premises as master, and then you define all the jobs you want, and as a source of the job or location, you pick that master server. So the jobs are, when you look into SQL agent, you will basically see the list of jobs. You cannot tell if that job is just a regular local job or it sits on the master server. It's in the properties when you see the difference. So you can define the jobs, and then you can add targets. You can add target servers. So when you right click on the SQL Server agent menu, you will see first create master, and then once you created that, you will see add targets, and you can add other SQL servers as the targets. And to fully utilize that, once you created the master, the target servers, you created the jobs, and then in the job properties, you assign the targets. So one job, let's say you have a job that runs some kind of health check every morning, and you don't want to copy that job to multiple servers, because if you change something in that job, you would have to change that in every server. So you create that in one job on the master server, you add hundreds of targets and schedule them. The schedule is of course the same for every server. So if you want to use that for, let's say, database backup or heavy operations, keep in mind that these jobs will kick off at the same time. So if you start taking backups at the same time of the whole environment, you might see some issues. So it's worth either creating separate jobs or play with the schedule with some conditions and do it this way. But this topic is outside of the scope of this presentation. And in Elastic Jobs in Azure, you also have targets, but your targets are not only Azure SQL. It can be shards, it can be pools, all sorts of stuff. And also, which is different from master and target servers on premises, you can say that the job with multiple steps can target different target groups. So let's say you have a job, the one with the backups, let's say, and you want to, in the first step, you want to kick off the backup on some servers, and in the next step, you execute the same command of the backup, but against the second target group, which has different servers. So this way, you separate the workload, and once the first step is finished, you can carry on to the second step, and so on and so on. So this is something you won't see on premises unless you write some solution, homemade solution. So this is really cool in Elastic Jobs. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's still in preview for many years now, and I've seen blog posts from years in the past using the old modules of Azure and deploying this solution. So yeah, with PowerShell, it's possible to create the complete solution. With the portal, as you will see later, it's not so easy. It's basically creating the agent and the underlying database, but then you cannot control stuff. Now let's review the main components of Azure Elastic Jobs. So we have the job database, and the job database has to be at the tier standard S0, the minimum requirement for that. It cannot be basic, as that's the lowest tier in Azure. And if you are thinking about the job database, think about MSDB on premises, and that's very similar. Let's say it's a younger sister of MSDB on premises. The job database in Elastic Agent. It will keep the metadata of your jobs, of the target groups, and the job history, and also holds all the stored procedures, system tables. Some names are very similar to what you could see in MSDB. So think it's MSDB-like. The other very important component is Elastic Job Agent. I told you about a little bit about that before, but it's crucial. It's basically the center of that solution. It's the resource you create in Azure, and it's responsible for managing the jobs and connecting to the servers and so on. So again, think about the younger cousin of SQL Server Agent. These two components are the first two components are very similar to what we have on premises. Next is the third component, the target groups. The target groups, as I mentioned before, can be defined on multiple layers, and you can have different targets in each group, and once you create the job, you can tell the specific steps of the job to execute on specific targets, on specific target groups. And I like to think about this as MSX, TSX, master target servers-ish solution, because it kind of works in similar way, but it's more flexible, and I like it, and you'll see in the demo how it works in practice. The last component, but also very, very important, is the job itself. And the job is just a task that is made of steps. It can be one step, as probably most of the agent jobs on premises, but you can have multiple job steps as well. And the job executes T-SQL, so it cannot run PowerShell or any other scripting stuff, just T-SQL. And as said before, you can define in the job itself, well, you can define the schedule and enable, disable, like other properties are on the agent. But you can also tell this step goes to this target group, or this step goes to this target group. And when you execute that, you'll see the history of different steps. And yeah, that's basically the whole solution. So four main components of the solution. Now let's see a handmade diagram I just made to show you a little bit details of how it works together. So we the whole Azure Elastic job, you can see the components on the screen. Some of them are grayed out, but they will pop in a second. So we have the job database, which is Azure SQL database S0 at minimum. That's the requirement. And then we can create the jobs. Of course, the agent is on top of the job database. So you have to first create the job database, then create the agent, then create the jobs. And the job, as mentioned, they can have multiple steps, and each step will execute T-SQL. And every step can go to a different target group. So we can have a target group that has two separate job steps from different jobs executing against that. And that might be, it depends on the scenario, but you can have, let's say, development A, development B, development C environments, and you want to run some kind of a health check or testing specific to each environment, but you want to cover that within one job. So one job, and we'll have three steps: development A, development B, development C, for example. And another important part of the solution are the credentials. And I will tell you a little bit more about that, because it took me a while to match all the stuff at the beginning. So when first I've created that, I was wondering like why we have so many different credential-ish stuff, like credential, user, login, what they are used for. So in my presentation, in my demo, I'm going to use three main credentials. The first one is the refresh credential. It will be used for the agent to refresh the database list on a target. So if your target is Azure SQL Server, the refresh credential is responsible for refreshing the current database list. So the agent knows when you drop the database, it won't execute the job on that database because it doesn't exist. So it won't throw an error. But also, if you add a new database to your target, to your server, and your target is the whole server, it will know, so it will execute the job against the new database as well. It won't skip it. The other credential is the execute credential, and it is responsible for executing the job on a target. And unlike the first credential, the refresh, which is all the credentials will be created on the job database, but then we will have a list of users and logins. So the refresh is on the, let's say, server level. The execute is on the target level. And if your target are multiple databases, you have to have all your logins users in a specific databases. The third credential is, let's say, optional, but just to show you that it's good to have different credentials for different purpose. Instead of having one credential for all of them, I could have one for all my examples, but I wanted to split them to their functional, to their functions. So let's say the collect credential is only responsible for collecting the data from targets and saving that to the source, to the main collection database. Now let's see the logins. So each credential needs a corresponding login in the master database. When you have the SQL Server on premises, if you want to create users, you usually create a login on the server, which is in the master database. So it goes to the master database, you create the login for refresh, execute, and collect. And then you create the users in the master database. But you create the user only for the refresh, because that's a server level. You don't have to create the user for refresh credential. You don't have to create the users for execute or collect, because unless you are going to execute the scripts against master database or collect data from or to master database. So that's not required. For the target databases, for user databases, you create the users for execute if you want to execute something on that database, or if you want to collect from or to that database. You don't have to create the user for refresh credential, because that's not necessary. The refresh is done on the server level, so in the master database context. Now, I think that's pretty much it about the whole feature, how it works, how it looks like, what are the components in Azure. Now let's switch to my favorite part of this presentation, PowerShell. In this presentation, I'm going to use 3 PowerShell modules. 2 of them are provided by Microsoft, and all of them are in PowerShell Gallery. But the third one, DBA Tools, is the community created and maintained, originally created by Chrissy Lemaire, but currently maintained by the community. And you can see on their website, dbatools.io, that there is many contributors, and everyone can contribute, everyone can add to the module, or if you have idea but you don't know PowerShell, you can always raise a feature request, a new feature request, or if you see a bug and also don't know how to fix it in PowerShell, you can raise a bug request or bug report, and someone might help you to go through. That's how I started. So I raised a bug on GitHub, and someone led me to fix that. So they showed me like where to look, what to check, how to run tests once I thought the bug was fixed, so I don't break it somewhere else in some other places. So yeah, but first let's start with the AZ 8.2. That's my current version. That's the Azure main module, PowerShell module, and I will be using that for connecting to Azure. So that's the first step of the demo, just to run this so I can have a context of my Azure account. Login, it will pop up the browser window where I need to put my credentials, and then just carry on with the whole thing. And it's also useful for creating the resources in Azure that are not SQL specific or SQL database specific, like the new Azure resource group. That's not something related to SQL. It's just a thing in Azure. So if I want to create the new Azure SQL database or SQL Server, then I will switch to different module. And that different module will be az.sql, which in my environment currently is 3.11. I'm just pointing out these versions because when I did my research before, or on any other cases with Azure, let's say the blog post or video was a year old or 2 years old, and some of the functionalities showed in the video were no longer in the module, and I couldn't say that from the video because there was no version. So at least you have a reference that in these versions it works as I wanted it to work. The Azure SQL module will be used to create the SQL Server, SQL Server database, and also all sorts of SQL Elastic job objects, like the agent itself, like the target groups, the credentials, even the firewall rules. So that's a dedicated module for all the SQL stuff. And the last but not least is the mentioned before DB tools. With DB tools versioning, you might find it when you watch this presentation, you might find it that they have already version 1.5 or something like that, because it's a very quick and changing environment, and you will see deployments, releases every week or even multiple times per week. So I'm just pointing out that this version is the one I'm using, but at the time when you are watching this or testing in your environment, you might already have a newer version. But in my case, I will be using mostly invoke-dba query to execute some T-SQL commands that I cannot replace with Azure SQL module, or I don't want to go to Management Studio. So it's a hack just to focus on PowerShell and don't leave the console at all. And like I said, if you don't know DB tools, go to their website, dbtools.io, and see the list of all the commands. And it's not only for Azure, it's Azure included in the functionality, but it's like they call themselves SQL Server Management Studio in command line. So yeah, just go there. If you're not familiar with DB tools, check it out. There is tons of videos or presentations and people who contribute and work with DB tools. And they recently released the book about managing the DB tools and working with DB tools. So yeah, go check that. With that said, let's switch to the goodies and to see how it all works in PowerShell. Let's switch to the demo. Okay, let's crack on. I imported the PowerShell modules. Now I'm going to connect to Azure portal using my credential. On the side, I have a login window to connect to my Azure account. I'm connected now, so just for the sake of the future servers, let's get the credentials. The next step, the first step in Azure, would be to create resource group to host all our resources, like SQL servers, SQL databases. Speaking of which, another step is to create Azure SQL servers. And to do so, I need to run the command new Azure SQL Server, and I'm going to create 3 servers. One is for the job database, the job server that will manage the jobs, and there will be 2 target servers for the demo purpose. It may take a couple of minutes per server to get created. Once the servers are ready, the next step would be to enable the firewall rules. I'm using this website API ipfi.org to get my IP address, and to add the first rule is to add my IP address to the servers to allow the connection from my local machine. The other rule would be to allow all Azure IPs, and so they can communicate between each other. I need to do this for all the servers. It's a quick process, so it will run a couple of seconds. Once it's done, the next stage would be to create a job database. And the job database is edition standard. That's the minimum for the job database, where for the targets it can be basic. So I'm going to use the new Azure SQL database command to create the job database, and then we'll set up the Elastic Job Agent on top of that. It will take some time again. The database is ready, more or less 1 minute currently in Azure. Now let's create the Elastic Job Agent. It also may take around 1 minute, depends on the traffic in Azure and the region, which one you select to create your resources. Now it's time to create the databases, the target databases. In my example, I will have 5 databases. 1 will be on one server and 4 will be on the other server, just to show you the difference between target groups later on. And all my databases, my target databases, will be in basic, the cheapest option, but because that's supported. As mentioned on the presentation, we need to create the database scoped credential for each job database and the targets. So in this demo, this presentation, I have 3 credentials: the refresh credential, the job credential, and collection credential. All of them have different functions, and this is possible to create with the az.sql PowerShell module using the new Azure SQL Elastic Job Credential command. Of course, the credentials are not the only thing we need to create. We also need to create the logins per each credential, and in the targets, we need to create the logins in master database for refresh and of course the users, and also we are going to create job credential and collection credential logins on the target in master database. I'm using the DB tools to invoke the tsql commands to create the users, logins, and proper roles. All you can see on the screen is like creating the users for job credential and collection credential in target databases, not the master, but the user databases. And the collection credential will need to read only writes to collect details from the database. Now I also need to create the login and the user for collection credential in order to store the data collected from the targets. Speaking of targets, here are the 3 groups I'm going to create. The first group is for all servers, so I need the refresh credential for that. The other group is just selected databases, so we don't need the refresh credential because we point to specific databases. And the third group is to include first all the databases from one server, and at the last step we exclude the database or 111, saying explicitly exclude the database. So in the results you can see that there are databases included and the one that we excluded. says exclude. The next step is for the collection part. We are going to create in this collecting database the table that corresponds with the data we collect, and we need the identifier as a first column. That's mandatory, but then we have all the columns that we collect from the targets. So the database created. Now let's go to create some Elastic jobs. I'm going to create 2 jobs, and the command to do so is new Azure SQL Elastic job. The first job has 3 steps, and each steps goes to different target group. Just to show you that the job can go to different target groups, and it basically creates the table. Each step creates the different tables. So I will show you how it works with different targets. Different databases will get different tables from different steps. The other job is the job collection, just to show you that we can collect the data from different servers and store them in the output place. So for that we need to configure all the output parameters, including the output credential. Okay, all done. Now we have our jobs, our steps, all security set up. Let's kick off the jobs now. So we can start the Elastic jobs by invoking start Azure SQL Elastic job and providing the name. I'm going to start both jobs at the same time. They will run in the background. In the meantime, we can check the progress of the execution. There are multiple ways to do so. We can just run this command and see what is happening with the jobs. They are waiting now. Or we can get the step execution and see at what step we are now. So yeah, and if you are in T-SQL, you can go to the tables in the job database. Let's see output of our first example when we target the job against different target groups. As you can see, we have step 1, step 2, step 3 tables against different databases. So step 1 executed on all 5 databases, step 2 only on 2 selected databases, and step 3 on server 1, which has 4 databases, but we excluded the database 111, so it didn't create a table there. Let's see the other example where we collected the details. Now in the collect table we can see the details from all 5 databases, whatever they are on, what database name is, and when it was collected. And that concludes the example. All the creation is done. Let's go to the portal now and see how it looks like in Azure portal. In the search field, search for Elastic Job Agents. Once we have a group, we can see the agent is created, is listed. Let's see if we can create one. I know it's a PowerShell edition, but just want to show you this one bit. Let's create a new Elastic job. And the name obviously will be different. Same subscription. We would like to select the job now, job database. And I will just show you that we have this 3 servers created in PowerShell, and since the target databases were in the lower tier, we cannot pick them up as job databases. But the one on job server is standard SO, so it's available to be picked up as a job database. Now, all set up, carry on to the review place. As the confirmation, we see that there is no additional cost for Elastic Job Agent, and we have all the basics. On top of that, you can always download the template, the JSON template, and if you want to reuse that and redeploy or modify or convert to Bicep, you can always do this here. Okay, so that's done. Let's create the Elastic Job Agent on top of the same job database we already used. It takes some time. In Azure portal, we will see messages that it's being deployed or it's failed. So let's see what is the result of this deployment. And it failed. It doesn't say at first what is the reason, so we need to go to the details of that error message. And we can see here that the job cannot create a new job agent linked to database, the DPS 2022, because there is already a job, agent job created on that database. That's our database. Confirmation again, that's standard as 0. And in our Elastic Job Agents, we can see that the new agent job was not created. We still have the one. That's something I wanted to make you aware, that you cannot create multiple agent jobs on the same database. We can see the overview of the current agent, the one we created with PowerShell. We have 2 jobs, and obviously the schedules and other settings are just for demo purpose, so it will be different in production. We can see the target groups, but the bad thing about the portal is that it lists the names of the groups only. Same for jobs. And same for credentials. You can see the credentials, the names, the usernames, but you cannot open that. You cannot change any properties. You can rename that. That's basically a read-only view of the properties. And on this screen, you can see all the details about the agent. Let's go back quickly to the overview, and we can see the latest 100 job executions. So we can see that the job failed. It took about 10 minutes or 9 minutes to complete, and but it doesn't show the information about what failed, why it failed, if it had multiple steps, what happened to the steps, if that was something that, I don't know, failed at one step and then continued or succeeded on the following steps. You don't see that in the portal. So for that, you have to use either the PowerShell, the command I showed you, or just query the tables directly. Now let me show you one more thing about the agent job. So we know we cannot create the second agent job on the second agent on the same database server. But what if we delete the agent? What happens? We delete the resource from the Azure and just know the name is AZ agent. So we drop that agent, basically. It's gone. And now we are going to create the new agent, brand new, with the same name on the same database. And the same deployment as I showed you before. But this time, there is no agent on this job, on this database. So let's see what happens. The deployment usually takes around 1 minute. It depends on the region you are in. I'm using the UK region, and I'm in the UK, but UK time, and it depends on the day. Sometimes on Fridays it was really quick, like Friday evenings, and Saturday mornings it was really slow. So it really depends on the time of the day, region, location, where you are. But usually it's around 1 minute, and we can see already it's taking longer than the previous example. So there is a chance it's doing something. Yeah, it did. So it deployed the new job agent. We don't see that in the portal. I don't know why it happens, but it happened to me a few times that I couldn't refresh the list and I didn't see the agent. Well, the other resources as well. But we can always go straight to the resource, clicking Go to Resource button, and see that all the details of the old agent, all the jobs, the job history, the target groups, and the credentials, everything is there. So we dropped the resource from Azure and recreated the new resource on the same job database, but the data is still there and my agent is still not showing in the portal. So let's refresh the whole page and it's there. Yeah, it's a bit annoying, but that's a trick to get the resource list. So let's see if that was the name case. So I recreated the job agent with the same name as the previous one. So let's drop the agent again, refresh a few times, and now it's done. Let's recreate that with a new name, just to show that the name is not a problem. Also, we created the duplicate job before with different name. So let's see how it goes this time. And again, the deployment, it takes some time. That's the advantage of PowerShell, because when you run the commands in PowerShell, you don't really have to wait and for the resource to be created to carry on with other steps. Because right now, even if I was able to create the jobs in the portal, I would have to wait for this window to disappear to show me deployment is finished. But with the PowerShell, we can just carry on. And the new job agent, new name, it takes all the information as the previous one. So as we can see, the details are preserved in the job database. And when you remove the agent job and the agent from the Azure, the details about the jobs are still saved in the job database. That's an important part of this presentation. And that's all, folks. Thank you for listening. I hope the tool, the feature you've learned about will be useful for you. I will be here. If you have any more questions, just put them in the chat and I will be happy to help you and answer them. And hoping you enjoyed the rest of the conference, and wish you the very best and hope to see you somewhere in the future, maybe in person. So thank you, organizers, thank you, the sponsors, and see you around. Bye.